So I'm in Proverbs today. Proverbs 31. But something before we get into that I do want to talk about. I've heard it articulated well. The idea that, well, we know as men right now in society and in the church, our place in creation is taken from us. Our role as men, a lot of those expectations of us are still there, but the place we had before, the place that God gave us, it's taken away, right? And not in like a secretive way, right? It's done very brazenly, very out in the open, um, in society, right? It's done in very obvious ways. You'll have the feminist movement and the progressive movement that quite literally says this is what we're doing. We are trying to equalize you in society, as men, as white men, and just men in general. You've been toxic, you have too much authority, so we're trying to, bring in other genders, bring in women, bring in other races, and we're kind of taking that position from you, and it's wrong that you know, you are who you are as a man. But then it's done in subtle ways. It's done in subtle ways on both the left and the right, religious and not religious. And I would say that's even more dangerous because they're not saying they're doing it, but they're slowly doing it. They're slowly taking away your masculinity, taking away your God given authority and leadership as a man. And I think even like in the church, right? I've heard it articulated that women will view you as men based on what the culture is telling them to do and based on how the culture shapes their mind. And women will conform and bend to authority, but I've heard it said that they are still doing that, but they're doing it to the wrong authority. They're doing it to these leaders that are pushing a false narrative, the society. They're doing it to the social media. They are conforming, they are submitting, like the scripture says, but they're not submitting to husbands and submitting to godly men. They're submitting to these false ideas because they're kind of let off the leash, and they're the whatever groups and companies and movements are able to pour things into their phone, right, and affect their mind and how they think. And women are now submitting to that, and that's where they're getting their ideas from, and that's kind of like what's causing some of that corruption, right? So, and I think the most dangerous of it is when it happens, like, in the church, right? So maybe we're gonna get to Proverbs, but maybe this is just really important for young guys and for all guys, right? Especially my generation. There may be women out there and girls that realize, okay, something is messed up, right? I want to have kids, I want to get married, I want to be in a relationship and all this stuff, but obviously we're not doing it. All the stats show that we're kind of declining the birth rate, and people are getting married 8 years later than they were in 1950. So, but maybe there's women, as there are men are waking up to it. Maybe there are women that are waking up to it, and they're like, okay, something's wrong. Uh, Something's wrong with the way men are portrayed and the way I'm encouraged to act and think and behave. Something's wrong. What I've been taught on my phone, the influencers, the people I follow. So I'm going to go to church. I'm going to go to this institution that, maybe it's just a non-denominational Protestant church. And their thought is, okay, they read the Bible, God's word. They'll know what biblical womanhood looks like, what biblical masculinity looks like. They will be able to tell me these things, right? And how I ought to think. So they go to church hoping to find that. And there might be some churches they find it in, but a lot of the churches, the danger is that the church will feed them a similar message, but it'll be wrapped in the Bible. So I think of, for instance, how the church, will encourage some of these ideas that seem to empower men and that seem to be against the current feminist narrative. And it'll say, oh, you are supposed to lead, men. They'll preach it. You are supposed to lead. God made you to be the protector and the provider of your family. And he made you the leader. And he made you to have authority and for the wife to submit. Right? And they'll say the man is supposed to do that. Well, the question is, I've heard it said, in what ways? Well, you can lead and have authority over your household and your wife in all the ways that, she's okay with. That she's fine with you leading in. That she's fine with you making decisions on. You can be the decision maker as long as she's willing to go along with those decisions. You can be the person who has authority and leads as long as she's fine with you leading in that particular area of life. And, but we're not going to support you, if it means going against your wife. So, it's kind of pointless. It's kind of like, here's all the responsibility, but none of the power. And that's the subtle message. I mean, you'll hear it, even in the most supposedly conservative churches. In one breath, they'll talk about how God made you, and he made you with a mission, and he brought evil on to support you and all that stuff, and how she was made to be your helper. They'll read the Bible, but they will immediately, in the same breath, speak of your marriage as an equal partnership. As a partnership, Oh, you guys both have a mission to follow God, and you just have to find a way to do it together, and that's a beautiful thing, and that's wonderful. And I used to be okay with that, but now I realize that's totally not right. That's not right at all. At least when you read the Bible, it's like God gave Adam a mission. He made him in the garden, and Eve was made for the purpose of supporting Adam. There's no talk of Eve having a mission and a purpose. Adam's there to support her and her mission and purpose. Or even so, there's no talk of you each have a purpose and a mission and ideals, and you come together if those line up and you both can kind of pursue those at the same time. No, Eve was made to support you in your mission, in your goals. That is what your wife is there for. The man has a mission from God. And the wife's purpose, her purpose is her husband. Her purpose is her man. But why do we raise up our young ladies, and why do we, in the conservative world, in the conservative right, and in the church, completely disregard that? And we say, oh no, you also have a purpose and a mission, right? And that may include going off to college and pursuing your career or pursuing your own ministry and all that stuff, right? And they wonder why these girls can't find men, right? Well, all these mission-driven men that read the Bible and they know their role, it's not compatible to have the modern the modern church girl, right, that you find. She has been taught in such a way that she is not compatible for a true godly man that has a mission, because it doesn't line up with the way God made things, right? So you're going to have that conflict, and it's going to be hard to get into a relationship. And it's unfortunate because even these Christian women have been lied to. And we've been lied to in the church. So you'll have women that will say something's wrong here. I want to get married, I want to have kids, I want to, be in a relationship with a godly, good man. But they don't realize that they're not compatible the way they are right now with that godly man, with that mission-minded man. Because God made women to help their man and to submit to their man and for the man to lead. And the church loves to preach that one part. Men, you're supposed to lead and protect and provide and all that stuff. But in the same breath, they will preach that this marriage is an equal partnership where your goals and your purposes, they all meld together. But that's not biblical. That's not true. It may even make sense. You think, okay, there's guys, there's girls, and, but that's not how God made it. That's not what we find in the Word. We find that women, their goal is their husband. Their mission, unless God called them to celibacy, is to help their husband, is to support their man. That is their one goal. Man, he has a goal. He has a purpose, right? God gives it to him. He may have a responsibility, his wife and his family, but that's not necessarily his one and single goal. His single goal is given, it's specific to him, that God's given him, right? And the woman must be able to come alongside him and help him, not intrude, not try to diverge him and say, oh, but what if we do this? What if we go this way? Oh, I'm this second voice that's like, it's an equal partnership and we have to decide these things together. And maybe you decide you want to run your family that way, and maybe there's a way to do it, but that's not what we read in the Bible. That doesn't seem to be the way God made things to be. He made it very clear that Eve was made to be the helper of Adam, the helper in what his goals and his decisions were. And the man was supposed to have authority over his wife. The church will act like they preach those things, but they won't. They'll say it, but they will also preach the other side, which is not biblical. That, you got to compromise. You got to meet in the middle. And this is kind of like you're both supposed to be like making these decisions together. And, if you want your wife to have input, and you should, any good man should, if you marry a wise woman, have her involved in some of your decision making, but you have the final say. You have the decision making ability, the God-given ability. And the church seems to want to take that away. And the worst part is they position themselves as the authority, as the people that know what biblical manhood is. But they obviously don't know what biblical womanhood is. So they're preaching this biblical manhood and all these responsibilities, but they don't preach in a way that instructs women how to behave, and instructs women to know their role. And it's very clear, because in the church you'll see just as many families pushing their daughters off to college with a mission and a purpose and to get their career going and everything like that. It's like, no, unless you're called to celibacy, your main goal should be finding a husband. And as parents, unless your daughter is called to celibacy, your main goal should be to find a husband for your wife, because her mission, unless she's called to celibacy, does not start till she has a husband, in my opinion. And I think the Bible backs that up. So why aren't we teaching this? Why aren't we encouraging this? Right? Anyways. Proverbs 31. O my son, O son of my womb, O son of my vows, don't waste your strength on women, on those who ruin kings. He's not saying don't. This is, because we hear about the Proverbs 31 woman who is a wife. It's not just any woman. She's a wife, right? She has her purpose. She has her goals. He's not saying don't waste your time on your wife, right? He's saying don't waste your strength and your time on women. A lot of guys out here, unless you have a girl that you're considering marrying, you don't really need to spend a lot of time with women or spend money on them, right? Maybe it's your mom. Don't waste your strength on them. Unless you have unless something in you tells you that you might marry this girl, or this girl might be your wife, he's encouraging you to not waste your time. He's discouraging you from wasting your time and your strength on women, because they'll use it up. And trust me, I've done it, man. I've gone through periods in my life, especially when I was a little bit younger. I mean, I'm still young, but like younger, where, man, that's like what I thought about. That's like I would spend all the time in the world texting and going on little dates and and then, for whatever reason it doesn't work out with that girl, and it's like, you know, there goes all your strength, all your time. So I'm very careful now to do that. I'm even kind of like talking with a girl right now where, we've only hung out a few different times and I don't really know where it's going right now. But I'm very careful. I'm very careful to regulate my time. Like, she lives pretty far away. And the first two times, I didn't drive. I think I made it very clear to her I wasn't going to drive up to see her, and spend all that time. And then the third time we hung out, I actually made the drive. Because she drove down a couple times, and it was a long drive. It was like 50 minutes, something like that. But after we hung out a couple times and she was willing to make that drive, I was like, okay, I don't know where this is going or if this is going to go somewhere, but, now I am willing to kind of put forth that effort, right? But I don't have the strength of the time to any girl that I start talking to or whatever on first dates or second dates to be just driving and spending money and doing all that stuff for it not to work out. I can't be doing that, right? So I'm getting better about it, but I used to not be good about it, man. I used to waste a lot of time in that department. Further down, so he's warning against wasting strength on women. Starting in verse 10, who can find a virtuous and capable wife? She is more precious than rubies. Right there we know that a good woman, a good wife, is rare and precious. He says, who can find? So just because she's pretty, man, doesn't mean she's a virtuous wife. Doesn't mean she should be prized. And I think they have this message for men, but they don't seem to have it for women. For men, they're like, well, you got to prove yourself and you got to become valuable. You can't just be living in your basement and yada yada. You got to earn respect. You got to, all that stuff. And there's truth to that, right? But that message applies to women too, in different ways, right? It's not that they're working and earning money and getting jacked, but in their own way. Just because you are a woman does not mean that you are a noble wife of good character, one that's more precious than rubies. So men need to be aware of this, that not all the women out there, one, women are not worth your time if they're not your wife. So be careful in that dating world, man. That's what I'm trying to do right now. Wasting your strength there. But also, even of the ones that you're interested in, it's rare. They're not all precious rubies in a sense. Valuable in God's eyes, right? They're valuable and in some sense, they're precious in God's eyes. But it says, who can find a virtuous wife? It kind of implies that not every girl is going to be a good wife. So, at least that's what it seems to me. Next verse. Her husband can trust her, and she will greatly enrich his life. There again, it's this idea, it seems to be that like men their task is to enrich the lives of their wives. I hear it in the church all the time too, like what you can do for her. And not that there's anything wrong with enriching the wife of your wife, but here it's just talking more about, it's more biblical. The idea is that your wife is made to be your helper, and she's made to enrich your life. Isn't it? It's kind of nuts how this all sounds crazy, but it's actually very biblical, and that's concerning, right? Especially for us that go to church that haven't heard this message, and it sounds very strange to us, right? But that's wrong. Next verse, she brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. All the days of her life. So I'm just going to say this right now. With how divorce is so nuts right now, at least I think it's like 50% of marriages end in divorce. I'm saying right now that the wife that divorces her husband, by and large, because I don't know the individual cases, but just as a whole, as a generalization, she's not a virtuous woman. She's not a good wife. At least not according to Proverbs 31, where it says, she brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. If she leaves her husband, irregardless of reasons, except maybe in certain circumstances. Well, I'm not going to get into that. But in general, if she leaves her husband or she's no longer enriching her husband's life, she is not this Proverbs 31 woman that says, oh, who can find a virtuous and capable wife? She's more precious than rubies. She will bring her husband good and not harm the rest of her life. So in other words, she's not going to leave him. Or she's not going to get lazy 10 years into the relationship and stop trying. Stop trying to be a good wife. Stop trying to enrich her husband's life or divorce him. So there is a genuine concern among men where we see women are freely and able to leave their husbands, and the court system is kind of in their favor in that regards. So a lot of these women, just by divorce statistics alone, statistically, a lot of women are not the Proverbs 31 woman that we're reading about. The one that stays with her husband her whole life and enriches his life and brings him good all the days of her life. Right? So it's a genuine concern. It's a real concern. Something to take note of. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that the church needs to get its act together. It needs to stop painting itself as your friend, but in reality, it's just a more subtle message that you guys are equal. It's this partnership. You're supposed to please your woman. All that stuff. It's like the feminist message. It's like the modern message, but it's scarier. It's more sinister because of how hidden it is, how it's using the Bible. It has the authority and it's coming from the position of a spiritual authority, but it's, using certain passages and not using other ones. And it paints a very similar picture, which is this idea of like happy wife, happy life, And they think that they can say, oh, we're for traditional marriage. Men, you can lead. Men, you can have authority. But, only in the ways that your woman wants you to lead and have authority. But after that, it's like, oh, bro, now that's like, yeah. Anyways, just a big frustration of mine. And I think the young guys, especially if they're in the Word, a lot of young guys, a lot of people I personally know, are just getting fed up with it, man. We're done with it. So just a little warning, something I'm trying to apply to myself right now. Right now I'm trying to apply this to myself is like in verse 3, Proverbs 31, not wasting my strength on women, knowing a lot of women are, well, one, they're most likely, if, not going to be my wife just by chance, right? Hopefully you find that wife right away, the first girl you date. And just in general, a virtuous wife that's more precious than rubies, who can find, right? So she's already rare to begin with. So just know the woman you're spending time with or you're thinking about dating, just be careful not to waste all your strength on her. He's warning us, right? In verse 3. Yeah. I mean, that's the main one, honestly. I think I had another one in here, but yeah, that's the main one. So, yeah, don't waste your strength on women. And, look for a girl that's going to bring you good and not harm the rest of your life, which, you can't tell the future, so that's the tough part, right? But at least now you have a standard, right? Something it's a pretty high standard, So, stay in the Word. Stay in the Word.